Welcome to the tens of people who made it tonight. The joke is just as funny the second time. I forgot to hit record, as is typical of a Dave Johnson Zoom. Rebecca, we are glad you're here. I know a couple of other people will probably be joining us in a few minutes as well, but you're also, for the most part, joining us on a cold, blustery day that many people had school off. So, extra brownie bonus points to those of you showing up tonight. In fact, if you missed December, I might actually add you to the attendance document as a little bit of a reward there. Oh, wait, now I've got to cut that out from the sketches. No, I'm not going to do that. But welcome nonetheless. This is the third unit, which will be up on the misocialstudies.org Giants website in just a few moments. And as usual, we are joined by our hostesses with the mostesses, Carol and Luann, who are going to be driving the bus for us this evening. So, without any other major announcements on my end, and in total respect for the amount of time we've got together tonight, I'm going to stop talking, welcome you all, and turn things over to Carol and Luann. So, Carol and Luann, take us through Unit 3. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, you should be seeing a PowerPoint that lists our or actually our 5 units. We have been trying to follow the spirit of the content standards for Michigan, and they seem to want us to focus on major economic activities. And so that we did in Unit 1 and Unit 2. What I realized, and I colored those units green on the slide because I realized they were happening outdoors a great deal, and had a great deal to do with vegetation. But wow, now we have reached Unit 3, and it is very different. It is not necessarily outdoors anymore. Part of it is outdoors. Um, what we'll be doing as we look at Unit 3, there are 2 lessons. What we'll be doing is looking at people's lives during this time, and we'll do a little bit of comparison. Well, was working in mining and the manufacturing that's related to mining, was that was that at all like farming, or was that at all like lumbering? They were jobs. They fed families, kept body and soul together. Um, Up on the screen, you see our major compelling question for in the lesson number 1 about mining copper and iron. And actually, lesson 1 is really mostly about mining copper. Um, and what we always want to ask is, how do people benefit? Do people in Michigan benefit from this activity? Do people in the whole US benefit from this activity? We'll be looking at where there were copper and iron resources in Michigan. We'll be looking at who was doing mining type jobs. Um, and then that's history and geography. But we'll also look at civics because, once again, governments, both US and the state of Michigan governments, play a role in whether people's jobs are going to be successful. Um, Later, uh, I'll present mostly about the mining of copper and iron, and then Luann will present a lot about the manufacturing that followed the mining, that used the ores that were mined. And a big emphasis of that is, where do you get the stuff that you need to manufacture? Again, governments played a role in helping to bring the copper and everything else, or the iron and everything else that was needed to actually make something uh, that people could use. So let me go to the teacher guide, and that was the intro. And I'm going to turn off, okay, I'll turn off that. And I'm going to take you, we have a transition at the beginning of lesson one. And part of the transition is to look back at the peninsulas of Michigan. We define a peninsula. The importance is that land is surrounded by water. We have great big peninsulas. Um, but it's really going to be interesting because the big peninsulas have smaller peninsulas. Um, and we have, we'll be sure to label them, and I'm just going to skip to the next slide. Well, where we're going to label the Upper and Lower Peninsula, and we'll do that, and then we'll ask a question. And just to be articulate, to use north, south, east, west, we're going to focus on one of these important layers in the Michigan clickable map that shows us corn growing land, which had a lot to do with where farming was most successful in Michigan. And we'll ask the students to name the peninsula and to describe where is it located, north, south, east, west. And as usual, we try to have an answer right away. That best, wonderful corn growing land, best for farmland, is in the Lower Peninsula and in the southern part of the Lower Peninsula. And we hope that the students will remember that the Nowland family that we talked about in lesson one was right about here in the Lower Peninsula, creating their farm. We have other valuable resources other than farmland, good soils in Michigan. And one of those valuable resources was pine trees. Where are the pine trees located? How can we describe that using peninsulas and directions? Well, it's really kind of neat. The pinelands are both in the Upper Peninsula and in the Lower Peninsula. Super important in Unit 2 when we talked about the lumbering industry and its green gold. I'm going to move now, and we're going to focus mainly on the Upper Peninsula, the UP. And what we'll look at are two major things in the Upper Peninsula. We're going to look at a corner of the Upper Peninsula that was the very last chunk that basically the US government got from Native Americans in a treaty. We're also going to look at that same area that was going to turn out to be a mining region, but nobody really knew that. So we've got a great big blue circle around the western part of the Upper Peninsula. And it's important that the US president, it was the power of the US president in the past, in the 1800s, to make treaties with Native American tribes. And in a treaty, this was the very last treaty about Michigan, where the Native American tribes gave up their land to the US government. It was located in the state of Michigan, but it belonged to the US government. The other thing that's important about this area in the blue circle is that this wasn't originally going to be a part of the state of Michigan, but because of a deal that was kind of demanded by the US Congress and the US president, because they both got to decide this one. This was a deal that was made in 1837 when Michigan became a state. And here's the deal. The land inside this circle is really special, but nobody really knew that back in 1837, where then there was a compromise that ended the Toledo War, when Michigan became an official state. And the deal that Congress, US Congress, and the US president insisted on was that Michigan had to give up land near what is now Toledo, Ohio. Michigan had to give up Toledo, and in exchange, got this land in the circle in the western part of the UP, the Upper Peninsula. Okay. Why is this so special? Nobody knew it. But government scientists found copper ore there and iron ore there, which would bring great, a great number of jobs, wealth to many people, reasonable incomes to other people, and all this because there was a compromise in the Toledo War that Michigan would get this part of the Upper Peninsula added to it. Going to the next slide, we are going to learn more, especially about the Coppermine. See all of that string of seas? This is a geological wonder, happened thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, that copper formed in kind of a major line here, and iron ore formed. There are very few places on the earth where this happens. Michigan was just amazingly fortunate. We are going to have an interesting story too, which I will tell a little bit, but Luann will tell mostly, and that is that this copper ore and this iron ore, if you wanted to sell it to other people, you've got to get it out of Lake Superior. It's located real close to Lake Superior. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the connection between Lake Superior and Lake Huron in this red box. We have a nickname for that area. It's called the Sioux Strait. There's a river that runs through it called the St. Mary's River. And a big problem at the start of the mining of copper ore and iron ore was that ships could not go through that strait because it had rocks. It's where Lake Superior is higher up than Lake Huron, and there are hard rocks in between, and there's like mini falls happening. It falls 20 feet in height, but gradually. And it was just too dangerous to try to run a big ship through that. So what had to happen was we needed a solution. Just as a review, we have a review asking the students to say, oh, okay, this area is called the Sioux Strait, and we have a problem because of rocky rapids, of dangerous conditions for ships. So I am going to close that off. That's our review of peninsulas. And I'm going to go next to actually talking about, we have several other reviews, but I'm going to talk next about copper. And here about copper. What does copper look like when you can take it out of the ground? We're going to see in this PowerPoint that people have been using copper for a long time, but we really, really use a lot of it today. It has to be dug out of the ground. It's really hard rocks. Miners need to dig it out of the ground. Here are examples, a few examples of small pieces of about what the hard rocks look like. And I suppose that, the little pieces over here, they look kind of distinctive and valuable. Actually, this huge piece is very valuable. Copper comes in this color also, excuse me. This is a huge rock in Calumet, which is in the Upper Peninsula. How did people use copper? Thousands of years ago, Native Americans didn't really have to dig deep into the ground. They found copper lying around near the surface, and they figured out that if you warmed up this rock, especially when they found more pure versions of copper, if you warmed it up, you could shape it into, well, what is this? Uh, we have spear points that they could use. We have knives that they fashioned out of copper. We have kind of like needles that they could poke through hides. So Native Americans were using this first in the 1800s, especially in the 1840s, when the government scientists found more and more copper. Um, People were able to make pots, um, which you can put in a fireplace or on a stove. Um, there are some colossal uses of copper. You might guess that copper can be shaped. And the Statue of Liberty, that's all huge plates of copper shaped into the outer part of the statue. How we use copper today is, I guess we still make statues and we make utensils, but we actually use little pieces of copper. And I wanted to show you an earlier telephone. And I suppose most students have never seen a telephone, but the telephone was invented or patented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876, when, fortunately, miners were and mining companies were mining copper in Michigan. And Alexander Graham Bell made the first way that people could talk over a long distance through the magic of copper inside his telephone. Electrons flow among the copper pieces and out the wire of the telephone and into wires that go out to the street and to telephone poles. And that's a way to get connected to other people so you can talk to them, so you can hear their voice. And it was all because of the little bits of copper wire that was inside the telephone and copper wire that was in all of the lines. Today, it's kind of cool. On the internet, there you can see the copper, the beautiful color of copper inside wires. Sometimes it's a really thick wire, like in that would be called a cable. Sometimes there are many strands of wire in something like what connects to a television. There might be a single wire inside the core. There are huge reels of wire used for wiring inside buildings. There's huge pieces of copper that are used for motors. And the wonderful thing about copper is it does an amazing job of carrying electricity, of conducting electrons. We can ask, all of us can find cords that have copper wires inside of them. We seem to need in our modern life to be plugged in a lot. Inside all of those cords is copper, and that copper conducts electric currents, electrons. Can go just I laid out just a few of this. This is very important in our house. The TV channel changer. My mouse has copper. My computer has copper. The smartphone has copper. The headphones have copper. We really didn't have the thing called mobile phones until the closer to the 1990s. This is how they have changed through time. I went to the U.S. Geological Survey, and they had a page about smartphones, and they said that smartphones contain copper, and the amount of copper inside a mobile phone is is the amount of that is larger than any other metal in the phone, and there are at least five or six other kinds of metals in a smartphone. So we have done tremendous change from what Native Americans made thousands of years ago to our electronics. But what we have in common is copper ore and working with that copper ore to make uh, implements that use electricity. A tremendous amount, we don't see it because it's behind our walls, a tremendous amount of copper is in the wires in our building. There is some in our plumbings. There is a whole lot in air conditioners and TVs, dishwashers, refrigerators, all have copper inside of them. Okie doke. So copper is important. And in order to have copper inside our electronics, somebody has to take it out of the ground somewhere. And we have, let me just check here. We have miners doing that. And let me take us to this. Starting in the 1840s, this is the same time that Mr. Nolan, the father, was still cutting down trees on his farm. We have copper mining starting in the Upper Peninsula, in the western part of it. And here we have a photo of men. I don't think very many women went down into the mines. This is a picture of a group of miners, and I would like you to notice this front row. Don't they look young? These are kids. Oh my goodness. I don't think they're fourth grade, but they could be 12 years old and working in the mines.
And fourth grade is, I mean, fourth graders are 9, 10 years old, so they're only slightly older than
Oh,
the
they're
kids.
only a couple years from
Yeah,
being these boys who went down into the mines.
right. And one of the pictures we showed, I think, shows kids that are even younger than that. So
About 60% of all the mine workers worked underground. And in this presentation, we're going to get a feeling for what it is like to work underground. Notice that I have kind of a bright yellow background because we're still on the surface. On the surface, there were huge buildings. What you see here is not used anymore because all of these mines are closed. Mining has moved to other states. We'll talk about that later. But the tall buildings were really important, and you still see them. They are the buildings that basically had the elevators that would get miners down into the ground. They would go 1,000 feet into the ground. Some of these mines went as deep as 5,000 feet into the ground. So you can imagine the importance of the elevators bringing men and iron ore up from that deep. Here's another, you get a feeling for the large machinery that was needed to pull. Things have funny names. Carts are called skips. They're really kind of big carts, not little carts. In the 1840s, the carts got pulled up by horses, but much in the later 1800s, they were pulling up lots of men at one time. They were pulling up tons of copper ore, and so you'd have huge steam engines inside of these buildings or next door doing the pulling. Here's an example of a cart or a skip. It's a really big cart. The workers are going to go downward at an angle in this skip, they called it a man skip to differentiate it from the ones that carried ore. We'll go next. I was reading about the early mines in 1845, 1850, before they invented the skips and the ways to pull people up. Men climbed down ladders. They would have to climb 60 feet down ladders to get to one tunnel, and then the next tunnel was another 60 feet they would have to climb down, and a third tunnel was another 60 feet after that. and a Methodist minister went down to see what the people in his congregation had to do, and they advised him to hold on to the ladder. Always hold on with both hands. In this picture, you see this is just the most minimal escalator you can imagine, and it's being pulled up by horsepower. Can you see what the guys have on their hats? It's dark down here. We have kind of a gray background to say that. Let's see, let me go to the next one. Oh, upstairs, when you get to the 1880s and the 1900s, we have look at that huge wheel being driven by a steam engine, pulling up ropes that are made of steel to pull up the miners and to pull up the heavy loads of ore. And now we're going to take you into the dark. I'd like you to watch for ways that the workers tried to have lights. Some of the lights are fancier than others. Let's go to the next one. Working underground, as you might imagine, required strength. Can you imagine? I would not like to climb a ladder going 60 feet down. You're going to see the strength that was required to break up ore underground. Always be looking not only for the strength that was needed, but also the steamwork, and think about how that compares with the strength and the teamwork that farmers and the people in lumbering needed. This is a fascinating picture. This rectangle highlights a big steel spike being held by one of the workers, who is trusting the other two workers to hit the bottom of that spike with a sledgehammer. It's like, oh my goodness, can you see that guy? It's like, this is teamwork and muscle power. What they're trying to do is make a hole in this section of the mine that is a mixture of copper and other stuff that is not, other hard rock. What they've got to do is break out chunks of rock so they can take it to the surface. And we will see about what they do with that later. Imagine these as huge firecrackers. Here the holes have been made, and the head miner has put black powder and then a fuse, and he is going to light this after and then run quickly to a safe place. And they will make an explosion to break up this rock that is mixed hard stuff mixed with good copper. I wanted you to notice, can you see how I put a rectangle? Look how that looks like a tree trunk. This is what is holding up the mine ceiling. We're still in the dark, and the government official who took this photo, he wanted people to be sure and see the candle. So he put an arrow next to it. Sometimes there was almost pure copper, not mixed. This was neat stuff, not mixed with other hard rock. And what they had to do was just break that up into smaller pieces and then haul it up to the surface. There was always advice. Workers reminded each other to be sure and bring the extra candles. um, Before other inventions, a miner wore a kind of a hard hat. He would put a clump of wet clay on the hat and stick a candle in the wet clay. It's like, oh, okay, I hope he had extra candles in his pocket. Um, After they had broken up copper ore into chunks, and I kind of circled that here, this is an example of strong-looking men who had loaded the chunks into a carrier, and this was going to be pulled up with this steel rope. Um, this was going to be pulled up probably on a slant to the surface. There was hard work. These gentlemen, they seem to have something other than a candle on their hats. They are pushing. This is the hard rock that contains copper. They're pushing these ore skiffs, which will be dumped into something that will then be pulled up to the surface. Let's see. And this is what it looks like at the surface. All of that copper ore would need to be processed, which involved a few steps. That's why 40% of the people who worked were up on the surface. It would require other steps, which we will see pretty soon. And just to show you, up on the surface, notice these piles of tree trunks? That's where you get those supports to hold up the ceiling of the mine. And some of the people who were working on the surface were logging crews. Fortunately, the Upper Peninsula had lots of hardwood forests that could be useful. So what we'll do is there were lots of workers, lots of houses, and we will next go to the above ground jobs. And let me get that started. Okay, about 40% of the people who work for the mining company, they worked on the surface. And we'll look at their jobs too. What I forgot to say, all of the images, the photos in the last presentation and most of them in this presentation, they're all from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress is the most wonderful resource, and they always tell you whether you have permission to use the photo. And when you have permission to use it, then it's called being in the public domain. We're going to go back to the piles. Those chunks of hard rock went to a building called a stamping building. Stamping, maybe they should have called it stomping, because it was the whole idea was to smash, crush the big chunks into much smaller pieces. Let's see. And again, they were absolutely enormous. By the late 1800s, there were enormous steam engines turning wheels that made the crushers move up and down, and the crushers would grind chunks of iron ore or copper ore, into a coarse powder. One of the references said it was kind of like the texture of brown sugar, like chunky but small pieces. The whole idea was you wanted to get very small pieces of copper and very small pieces of the other rock that you didn't want to use. Um, and what's cool, after the crushing, they put everything in water. And what's neat about copper is the copper is heavier and it would fall out and get collected. And the lighter stuff would float on the top and get floated away out into ponds. Now that's kind of a problem because when you float all that junk into the ponds, it kills everything in the ponds. So that had an environmental impact. But now here we have got small pieces of copper, and they go to a completely different building, a building called a smelter. And the important thing about the smelter is that it has smokestacks. And the reason it has smokestacks is because there were really, really, really hot furnaces. This is I didn't realize it back in about 2017 when we were driving through, we visited Copper Country, and I saw all these brick buildings, and I didn't know what they used to be because I didn't know anything about copper at the time. And so I saw this. It's just a red brick building that's still standing there. All right. The smelters had chimneys and really hot furnaces, and I cannot imagine what 2,300 degrees is. But that is hot enough to turn solid copper to melt it into a liquid. The journalist who got to go inside there said it was very hot, and he said it was a dazzling stream that was flowing out of the furnace. And what you've mainly got is very close to pure copper. Let's go downward here. There's very few pictures of what they did with the liquid copper, but I don't know if you can see inside this oval. This gentleman is far away from the hot liquid copper, and he's pouring it into molds. And he's far enough away that he doesn't get burned. It's kind of, he's operating kind of a huge spoon or a ladle. That's the hugest soup ladle I've ever seen. What is going to happen is inside of these molds, the liquid copper will cool into a solid, and you get what's called an ingot, which is a very strange word. We are going to see pretty soon that those ingots would not stay in the Upper Peninsula. They were going to be shipped to lots of places in the United States. The journalist who was watching these men work said that 6 men working in this great big room could produce 200,000 pounds of copper ingots in one day. At that time, that was worth a lot of money, $30,000. Those ingots did not stay here. There were workers on the surface who loaded. One of the readings said that these were about 46, 50 pounds ingots. Notice how they're being moved into the ship. That ship is going to first sail on Lake Superior, and then it will, thanks to a canal, move into Lake Huron and other Great Lakes so that manufacturing can use the copper. The copper mining region is here in the Keweenaw Peninsula, and that copper was going to move through Lake Superior into other Great Lakes. It moved by ship into all of the Great Lakes, to where you see dots that show more population. So we'll get out of this one. And I have one more here. And telling us a little bit more about the workers. The owners were interesting too. The owners generally were not immigrants. The owners were businessmen who had been successful in other large cities of the United States, like Boston and Cleveland, and they were generally Americans. But we are going to be looking at the many immigrants who came to Michigan from Europe, who came, in this case, to work in the mines. Now, we saw this graph earlier when we talked about lumbering. By 1890, for all of Michigan, if we look at where people had come from, I think students were surprised to see that so many people had come from Canada to work as immigrants and then stayed to work in Michigan. A large number of people had come to all sorts of places in Michigan. They had come from Germany, but we have many other Netherlands, Sweden, Poland, England, Ireland, Scotland. I'm going to show you a map made by the Census Bureau to show foreign-born people, immigrants, who had come to the United States by the year 1900. Now, they would have come in preceding years, and they would have been counted in the census for 1900 as having been foreign-born, even if they'd been, if they'd been here 1 year or if they'd been here 50 years. The dark colors on this map mean the darker the color, the higher the percentage. And the darkest color means that more than 34% or higher of the people who lived in those places were foreign-born. What do you notice about Michigan? What does the map tell you about Michigan? How does it compare with places in the South? Remember, there had been slavery in the South? How does it compare with New York, where the Nolan family had come from? Michigan has a lot of dark brown, dark orange. We're going to focus in and zoom in on the Upper Peninsula. It is the darkest category. There were a lot of foreign-born people had come to the Upper Peninsula as a percentage of population. Now, certainly, there were native-born Americans who were living there, but this was an exceptionally high percentage of foreign-born. I focus on, I don't know if it's pronounced as Houghton County. It had the largest copper mines, and I circled it up here because we are going to next see a report about the percent foreign-born in Houghton County, and we'll take you there. By 1870, Houghton County had 57% of its population was foreign-born. That's more than half the people who lived there were immigrants. Next, and this is a report provided by Michigan Technical University that they found in the 1870 census. And this 57% foreign-born made Houghton County really special because There were only two other places in the United States that had higher percentages. Um, we are looking at a special place. Um, why is this important? I'm reading the blue right now. Mine owners in Copper Country in Houghton County were happy to hire foreign-born immigrants. As you saw in some of those underground and above ground mining pictures, sometimes the jobs were difficult and dangerous. And there was a problem. A lot of Americans who had jobs really did not want to move to a cold and snowy place like the Upper Peninsula to do a mining job. Um, so the next question that might arise is, why did immigrants come to work in the mines? And again, this is a wonderful source from Michigan Technical University, and we can just read a few examples. There were Cornish miners. They are the ones who brought pasties with them, this food of the Upper Peninsula. Cornish miners in Britain were facing unemployment. So they were pushed, in a sense, out of Britain because the mines where they had been working were closing. There wasn't enough copper in them anymore. But they were experts at what they did. There were Irish workers who felt several pushes to leave. They had depended on growing potatoes, and they were farmers, and there was a disease, and they couldn't feed their families. Furthermore, there were large landowners who wanted to change from raising crops to just raising animals on pastures, and they wouldn't rent their land anymore to the farmers. We had French-speaking Canadians. Now, I suppose they could feel pulled to Michigan because Michigan is really close by. It also was kind of familiar. It had forests like they had back in Canada, and they were used to doing lumbering jobs in close places. But there were French-speaking Canadians who also were farmers, and they came from large families, and there just wasn't enough land for everybody to be farmers anymore. Another example is Germans. There were Germans who felt pushed out of Germany. They were fleeing because they didn't want to be drafted into armies during wars. They too were a lot of young people who could not be farmers anymore because there wasn't enough farmland. If we move, I'm going to move here to Finland, number 5. The Finnish people at that time in the 1800s were not able to rule themselves. They had powerful neighbors, Sweden and Russia, who took control, who took the best land, and basically many Finnish people were forced into poverty. So they were pushed to leave. Immigrants from Croatia, which is also in Europe, felt pushed because their country had been taken over by neighbors, and their they had unhelpful political rulers and also few farming jobs. A major pull then to the Upper Peninsula and the sometimes hard jobs it was an opportunity to have a paying job that would support a family. And here we have them coming. We have maps showing of where people came from. Just a reminder about how close Canada is to Michigan. And therefore, a lot of French-speaking Canadians coming. Just a reminder, the foreign-born immigrants were coming to an Upper Peninsula with copper and iron, but also with a lot of snow. What do we say? No, yeah, notice the heavy snow. Okay, so I think I am ready to hand this off and stop sharing so that Luann can carry on.
Me, oh my goodness gracious. Is it my turn already? Did you stop sharing already?
I did.
Okay. I'm looking to see. Now we did all of this. Oh, I know why it's not working because I'm not using the right thing. All right. One of the things that we have um in our units, and I am going to be doing the importance of steel and everything. There is a video. Let me see if I can find it. Was it in yours, Carol? I don't remember. There's a video. If you look
Oh,
to,
it's down.
yeah, okay. So in step seven, no, step six,
That's it.
Carol unit, there is a really cool video, but it's long. And there are parts of it that you might not want to show kids. And so Carol and I tried to make sure we did some of the highlights of, what's going on. So if you want to show videos about copper mining, the beginning to 2600, 26 minutes is good, except that there's a little section in there where a woman talks about how a lady lost her child and then committed suicide, and that her ghost is haunting this building. Some kids could handle that and some kids can't. Later on, it talks about, well, it does talk about the high death rate of children, which is kind of important. And then also in the 18-minute to 19-minute, it talks about a man who was um, a disruptor that they shot in the back and threw on a train to Chicago. So there's a little bit of violence in the video in the first section. Then it talks about iron mining and gold mining. So we put that in there. I do have some questions about the first section that I haven't uploaded yet. And so for activities that you can do with the kids, there's a section here about things that you can be doing. So I want to talk about the video to make sure that, it's long and I wouldn't show all of it. Parts of it kind of drag, but there are some parts of it where they interview some of the descendants from the immigrants, and they talk about, she came here from Finland. She didn't know anybody. She didn't know the language. She had to try and assimilate, and how some of the different immigrant groups got together and, kind of created their own help society. So if they lost a loved one in the mine, and the video does talk about how dangerous mining was. And so, that they had these help societies to help the widows and the children left behind. So it has a ton of good, really good information, but there are those couple little spots there that in this day and age, you just have to be careful so you don't get a parent complaint. Um, as for me, I know we have to take a break. Do we want to do a break really quick, Dave, and then I'll get going, or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, we can take a quick 5 minute break and then resurface in five.
Okay, and then yeah, because mine's not going to take the 40 minutes that we need, so we might end a little early if that's okay.
Also totally fine. We'll see you guys back here at 5:30. As we come back from break here, I'll let you guys know that I did get the website updated, so the new unit should be linked properly there, but I will do a deeper dive tomorrow morning to make sure. So, welcome back. It's 5:30, and we will turn things back over to Luann. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I remember when I was teaching fourth grade, and my kids absolutely loved this unit. And when we talked about going through it all, I told Carol there's not much we need to do to it because it's, really pretty. It's really good, and the kids loved it. And then she did an entire new unit on copper mining, which totally blew me away. It's just fantastic. And everything on here, it's all Carol and Phil. I helped with little bits here and there, but I don't want to take any credit for this. It's all Carol. She did all the hard, heavy lifting. So I like how in depth Carol did how in depth Carol was with the copper mining, because it really makes it easy to slide over to iron and steel and how important they were, and how their process was very, very similar to the copper mining process. So, we always talk about, how important is steel in our lives. And my kids, we would look around the room, and, their desk was made of steel, and the chair legs are made of steel, and the computers and the part of the door and the thing that holds the door closed in a lockdown is pure steel. Thank goodness. And so, I mean, what is steel in your daily lives? And so we talk about and we think about all the different ways that we need steel today. We talk about cars. Although it's interesting, Carol and I had a discussion yesterday about how vehicles nowadays aren't made with as much steel as they were back. Think about the great big Edsel and the big cars in the 50s and the 60s, big Cadillac. So I'd like to see a weight difference. Maybe I'll see if I can find one. But we use a timeline again with the earlier events happening at the bottom and the more recent events at the top. And the timeline of, which one uses the least amount of iron and steel in ways transportation has changed over time. And, hopefully the oxen cart will remind them of the Nowlands and how, if they hadn't had the oxen cart, they would have really had even much more difficult time surviving. And then how, the train came later in their lives. So I like how this all kind of connects together, all the units. And so then, which one uses the least amount of steel, and of course it's the horse and buggy, but those still had, the axles were made of steel, and some of the equipment on the harnesses and stuff like that. So we talk about how important the iron and steel industries were in the United States, and how important Michigan was to all of it. So why is it important to us? The railroad, and of course, kids, unfortunately, they don't see railroads like we used to see railroads when we were younger. We don't have to stop and wait for a train to go by the road like we used to. And I used to, we used to count the cars, and, that was a really long one. It had 150 cars to it, and, but railroads were really important, and they required a lot of steel. So do bridges and parts of roads. Tall buildings, grain storage, all of that is steel, and all of that is necessary for farmers. And a lot of kids, when we were looking at this, when I was teaching it, my kids were like, wait a minute, that rock is what makes steel? And they had a really hard time understanding, how that there is iron ore in the rock and how they have to process it. So Michigan was at one point the number one iron producing state, followed by Minnesota. And then it's the same process. It's crushed and heated and melted, and all the gook taken out to get to the pure. That's an industry term, gook, to get all the stuff that they can't use in the steel, to make steel. And then I love how this shows, originally in the 1800s, what the furnaces look like versus what they look like now. And I believe this is what the steel plant in Gary, Indiana, I think. But they both used high heat. They both had a similar process. It's just with automation, we're able to do it a little bit faster. And there's some videos that we've added that will show the process too. And then, of course, with maps, we're showing where It's not up in the Keweenaw Peninsula like the copper was, but the iron ore is down in the lower part of the Upper Peninsula. And how there's also iron ranges over here in Minnesota. Um, and so, we take a look at, we're still back in the UP. We still have some of the same issues as copper, trying to get miners to come, lots of immigrants working in the mines, terrible conditions, in an area that's very, very remote, very, very cold this time of year. Um, and
Underground.
and underground too, just like in the copper. So I like how, Carol always uses great maps with showing where things are located and close-ups of where they are. Um, so, and then there's some review questions at the end of, which two states and, what are some important things. And I'm sure the kids could sit and list all kinds of different things that we use iron for, steel for, and then there's answers on the back. Or sorry, answers on the last, that's the last slide. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry. And I went through all this and I was all ready for this presentation, but I still
Sorry.
screwed it. What did the iron mines look like? What were the jobs like compared to mining and lumber? And then we talk a little bit about that. So you can, if you click on this about mining and the mines, it does, it isn't a secure website, but it's got some fantastic pictures. And I love looking at old pictures like this, and seeing how things were set up and looking at the workers and their lunch pails. Were they their lunch pails or were they maybe the pails that they took down with all their other equipment? What it like, could you imagine working in a place that deep and that dark? And just if you had claustrophobia, you could never be a miner. You just couldn't do it. I like how it's showing, the different timber used to shore up the mining shaft. This is a really good resource. This is more the open pit mining that came later, that the video that we have talks about. But just really, I don't know. I love looking at old pictures. So anyway, this is a really good resource to show the kids. Again, this is just straight up a piece of a tree, a big old log. I mean, it still has the bark on it, it looks like. Um, and then, maybe the building, the shaft there. Um, like I said, I can't imagine being down in there. And the stuff that's above ground and then some more of the modern things. Um, just look at those guys. Anyway, so it's a really good resource and it's right there at the last part of the first first part of the I can't get this to move. Sorry. I gotta move this somewhere. Move this lower. Sorry. Need to shrink my screen a little bit. There we go. And then we go into Fayette and the iron production that's in Fayette, which is it's really cool how using the maps we can see Fayette is way down here. It's on Lake Michigan and not on Lake Superior. How did they get the materials there from the iron mines? So the iron mine is on the southern part of the Lake Superior there on the northern part of the Upper Peninsula. The Jackson Iron Company near Marquette. And they had to get the iron to the furnaces that were in Fayette. And they used railroads and they used boats to get them there. And so this is a worksheet that the kids can have in front of them if you can print it. Labeling the Great Lakes. And by now the kids should know how to label the Great Lakes. What's the Upper Peninsula and Lower Peninsula, where the iron mine is, and Fayette. And then they can use that. We can give them a blank one I think there's a blank one at the end where they can label it themselves. And Fayette had the furnaces. Um, they stopped working in 1891, and the town now is a ghost town. It's actually a state park. I've had students go, "Oh, I've been there. I've seen that. It's really cool." The furnaces are still there, and there's lots of information at Fayette State Park. If anyone wanted to take a field trip there, they don't have virtual field trips yet, I think it would be a really cool thing if they had it like they do for the Williamsburg park. So the furnaces are where they melted the iron ore, and then they also used charcoal and limestone. And then those bars were shipped to other parts of the United States, which is why it's right here on the water. And the furnaces used were smelted iron ore. So the smelting is a process, like Carol said, they used really weird names for different things, you know. Like the skips. That doesn't make sense. Um, so melting, heating it and melting it and getting rid of whatever wasn't iron to create the most pure iron that they could. And the three raw materials that are needed to make iron bars is the actual iron ore, carbon and limestone. And then we go through and talk about where to get limestone and what carbon is. And what's interesting is you needed carbon more than you needed iron ore or limestone to make iron. So carbon was one of the more important parts. And carbon, and I like this picture too. Oh, this isn't the one I'm thinking of. So iron ore is crushed. They put in the charcoal and the limestone. The limestone helps filter out all the stuff that shouldn't be in there. Um, and then the raw materials that are needed. So 2 tons of iron ore plus 3/4 ton of limestone and 4 to 5 tons of charcoal have to go together to make 1 ton of steel. And I know my students were like, wait a minute, if you have 2 tons of iron ore, how do you get and all this other stuff, how do you get 1 ton of steel? But all of these things work together with the high heat to filter out so it's pure steel. So it's a lot of resources to make, I don't want to say a small product, but it's an important product. So the charcoal was made from wood. The hardwood trees grew near Fayette. They hadn't been lumbered, thank goodness. And they were able to take the wood and create charcoal from it. And it talks about the process of that in this PowerPoint. That's the same slide. So they would take the wood and they would heat it in a kiln and slowly heat it up, not like we would do for our fires, and that eventually made charcoal, the same kind of charcoal that we use to barbecue with.
Yeah.
So, um, so 35 cords of hardwood in each kiln produced 1,750 bushels of charcoal. Took 6 to 8 days. That's a long time. And then one of the things that they did is they produced more and they created more and more of the kilns so that they can create more and more of the charcoal. But then right here's, what happens? What can you guess is going to happen, boys and girls, if they're using all the wood nearby? And that the answer to that was they had to quit, you know, they had to quit using the furnaces because they didn't have enough of the charcoal. So the hardwood trees became more scarce. It became harder for them to get the wood to make the charcoal. And so they actually, eventually shut down because they were fine. There were other places in our country that were able to make, they started using coal um, to make the charcoal. Um, and we go into that a little bit later. The limestone is the other raw material that's needed. And limestone is pretty plentiful in the UP.
It's
Um,
right next, this is right next to those kilns
right next to it.
and the
Yeah.
furnaces. It's just right there to, to take.
Well, and they, yeah, I mean, whoever created, the um, Fayette furnaces put it in the right spot. I mean, it's on the water, it's by limestone. We've got all these trees. Well, these trees weren't there when they were done, but they had a lot of hardwood trees. Um, they had everything that they needed. And of course, you think back to the lumbering unit that we did, and I always think of the Lorax, who speaks for the trees, and when you cut them all down, then you're kind of stuck. Um, so then the third raw material was the iron ore that looks like a rock that they would pull out of the iron mine. They were also underground, several hundred feet to pull the iron ore out, and then they had to get it to the furnaces. So this stretch here, I don't know how many days it took. Carol, did you ever find that information? Like,
Oh,
was
I'll
it
have to
a
look. Yeah.
2 day trip on a train to get there? Um, and then think about, what the Upper Peninsula is like in the wintertime. So, Fayette his State Park is a great place to go. And if the kids, one of the activities we have is having them plan a field trip. If you don't live in the UP or can't get up there, you can plan it and you can see what else is around there. Um, so part two of Fayette, looking what workers did in the iron mills or the iron mills. So they had it. This is basically from the last presentation, where the iron mine is, where the furnaces are. This is what they look like in Fayette, where it was smelted, trying to get pure iron out of these three ingredients, these three raw materials. And so it does repeat a lot of the things that were in the other slideshow, but by the time we were done, my kids could tell you the three things that were needed to make steel: iron ore, carbon, and limestone. And then a picture of the different furnaces, the casting rooms. So all the material went in the big tall furnaces and were heated up. And then it was later emptied out onto the casting room floor, where it cooled. They were able to pull out the impurities and the things that would not, that what they wanted to filter out so that the steel was more pure. And this is what it looked like outside, where you had the kilns where they were making the charcoal, the wood that was needed to do that, piles of limestone, all right here next to the furnace, and then the iron bars. If you look, the iron bars are closer to the water, and when you think about, loading them onto the ships to be sent out around the world, around the country anyway, you know, when we talk about location and connection, that's an important part. They couldn't have done any of it if they weren't next to a water source. Excuse me, the workers, they had homes in Fayette. There was almost 500 people there. When the Jackson Iron Company closed in 1891, a lot of the workers went other places. And now no one lives there. It is technically a ghost town. Many of the workers were immigrants, much like in the copper mining. Some were from Canada, other countries around Europe. And what I would always make sure my kids understood, in the video, the bigger video, they talk about the Cornish workers. Well, the Cornish workers are from Cornwall, England, and that's where we get our pasties from. So the kids, to all the UP's well-known dish actually came from England. And so the kids were all like, whoa, really? So when they say Cornish, think English. And so that was, hard to hammer into their heads. But once you use the pasty, they get it. They're like, oh, okay, we get that. So the pasties were actually an English dish. Many of the workers were immigrants, and here's this is this from a census, Carol?
This is from they have these signs when you go there and buy a house, and they say, well, this house had this family, and they were from Canada.
Oh, I didn't know that. So the kids can look and see the different places people came from, Bohemia, and you'll have to explain where Bohemia is. Um, this is like Germany, Saxony,
Yeah.
over that way, right? Romania.
Yeah, Austria, Czechoslovakia. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I always think Germany. I don't know why. If they wanted to become U.S. citizens, they had to renounce their loyalty from where they came from. And so this shows, I love this. It shows Mr. Abraham Bestman renounced his loyalty to the King of Holland. So he was Dutch, to become a U.S. citizen. So it was one of the things for citizenship. So, um, the ghost town of Fayette is there. Like I said, it's a state park. People go and visit. And like I said, my kids were like, "Oh, I've been there." And you can see, the furnaces are still there. And then, iron and steel moved to other parts of the United States and started using coal instead of charcoal. And they had newer furnaces and newer processes, which, with farming, we got more, or better equipment to farm better. And with lumbering, they did, were able to do that better and faster. And if you ever watch any of the shows where they're taking all the big logs out of the forest with these huge machines that strip the branches in seconds and pick it up and haul it, and it's just incredible what inventions can do. And so that's one of the things that made Fayette become a ghost town. Besides the fact that they ran out of trees for their charcoal, um, they found better ways or more efficient ways to make it. And so, and America is like that. We're better. We're ready for better, faster, cheaper. We want to, we don't have an attention span anymore. We got to make it as fast as we can and the best way we can. Um, and so that's what they did. So we go back to our timeline of what things look like in the 1800s with the Fayette Iron Factory. And then I believe this is Gary, Northern Indiana. So the steel plant there in Gary. And how it has, I mean, it's right there on Lake Michigan, the southern part of Lake Michigan, and it's still important. It's still process, it's still in, it's, sorry, the U.S. Steel is still there. They're still working. So we can talk about the economics of the jobs, the raw materials. So here's a review sheet for the kids to answer questions. And then here's some answers that are there. And then steel in the Great Lakes. I think do you want me to do that one, Carol, or just skip down to the Sioux Locks?
Um, why don't you do the first one?
Okay. Sorry. Well, and we talked about how steel mills were important around the Great Lakes. We're going to look at it, the steel industry in the United States and the U.S. And this is the Gary, Indiana plant. And using the maps, we can see that Gary, Indiana is not very far from us. It's on the base of by the southernmost part of Lake Michigan, just about. If you've ever driven through there, it's not a very fun place to drive through there. There's a lot of smog. And as an aside, my mother went to a pulmonary doctor when she was in Florida, And he said, "You're from Michigan, aren't you?" And she's like, "Well, how on earth can you tell that?" He's like, "You were able to breathe in air from Gary, Indiana." And there was some kind of marker in her lungs that he was able to tell that she was
Oh,
from Michigan and that all of this air pollution blew
oh
our way. And she, I mean, so anyway, it's just an aside. Sorry about that.
no.
People use steel in our modern lives. We talked about that and remind the students, of did you go home? And that could have been a homework, assignment. Go home and see if you can list at least 20 things in your house that are made of steel, and don't say the big pot and the little pot and the frying pan. You just say, kitchen utensils, or you can find a lot of stuff. What are things in your bedroom? The TV that you watch, well, it doesn't look like it has a lot of steel on it, like the old-fashioned ones did. There's still a lot of steel in there. We review the ingredients for making steel again, um, and how iron ore can be made into taconite pellets, um, or scrap iron. These are the three different ways of using iron to make steel. A review of where the mines are, or where the
Or
range,
or that, yeah.
where the ore is. Yeah, the iron ore ranges. Have the kids label them. Um, how we went from charcoal, which is what we used in the Upper Peninsula, to coal. Other places used coal, and heating coal slowly produced coke. And make sure the kids know that's not the bubbly beverage, um, something totally different. And then maps on where the different coal can be mined, and looking at I love this map, how, Michigan's here and we have coal mines not too far away. So we can get the iron ore to them, or to the steel mills that are around the water around the Great Lakes. Um, Open mining, I love this picture with the huge equipment and the things that they use more in recent times than they did back in the olden days. Limestone, and where all the different limestone deposits are. So if you add the iron ore and the limestone and where the coal is, I mean, Michigan and the Great Lakes area is extremely important. Here in the newer furnaces, using the three different raw materials, you notice we're on the water again. That's really important. And how using the great big tankers was one of the ways, the lower lakers, of hauling things. It was cheaper to do it on the ships than it was just about any other way. Um, and then we talk later about the Sulaks, and the Edmund Fitzgerald is also part of this lesson. But, how does that influence where companies are going to put a steel factory? So, East Chicago, it's right there on Lake Michigan, um, and how important having things or using the waterways, how important that was. And if you think back to how they transported things, when the Nowlin family, they walked a lot of things. They had the oxen cart. Later, they had the train. So the lower Lakers became a requirement for hauling all of the iron ore or the copper ore to the different mills. So this really shows where the iron ore is, where the steel mills are, how important, our state was to the production of steel in the United States. Um, Showing where the iron mines are again, and the big lower Laker ship. And then you can have the kids draw a line, and then showing how to get iron ore to the different steel mills. And so there's an example of that. Um, the large mills are near where the coal mines are, so they could get the coal to create the iron ore or to melt with the iron ore. And then this graphic is back with the different things necessary. We have blast furnaces now instead of the like the Fayette furnaces. And there's some videos too that show what a blast furnace is, which is it's really interesting. So how many tons of ore, how many tons of limestone, how many tons of coal, to make iron, to make steel. Um, so this is maps again showing the coal regions with the steel mills, which shows, the steel mills are there because they're close to the natural resources to help um, make steel, and it's super important. And then asking the kids the three main ingredients, the raw materials, and why do they need to be next to large bodies of water. Um, so then we move on to the Sulaks, which is really, really important, and it's a way of showing how our government, our federal government, um, created with the Army Corps of Engineers, created a way for us to ship everything we needed out around. So we start with this map, and I think Carol, you had this map in yours too, right? I think you did
Yeah, it
in the
was a
top.
little different. Yeah, it was kind of just an enlargement more.
Yeah. So the Sulaks are really important, and if the
If
government hadn't, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go back to the other one. I'm so glad. Can you see where it says on the right-hand side, Rocky Waterfalls Rapids area? You just imagine trying to send one of those great big freight laker ships through those rocks. It's just not possible. And if we want to get really dramatic about it, I could find the descriptions of in 1845 when they knew they wanted to move copper and iron, and they had to literally lift a boat out of the water that was carrying ore, put all these logs down, and roll the boat over that rocky area because they couldn't float it over. It would have wrecked the boat.
Mhm.
So this is the most wonderful Army Corps of Engineers photo ever.
Mhm. I agree because it shows how important, those locks are. And when you created this in 2018, at the very end of this, and I hate to be a spoiler alert, the locks need work. They need help. We need, um, it's very, very important to our Michigan's economy and the United States economy to be able to
So
have.
Michigan was a state, and there just was the rocky part, the rapids.
Mhm.
And Michigan was a state, in 1837, and they found the copper and iron ore in about 1842. And then about 1845, our representatives and senators in Congress went to the Senate and the House of Representatives, and they said, we really, really, really need to build locks, and we need help doing that. And it will benefit everybody. And it took a decade to get that through Congress for the rest of the senators and the representatives in the United States to figure out this might benefit them too.
Mhm.
And then they had to get the president to agree because nobody can spend money unless both the US Congress and the president agree.
Mhm.
So finally, I think it was 1855, they finally opened this up with one lock.
Mhm. And they have since expanded it. So, and it, I mean, if we go to this this slide and we think about the previous presentation with all the different steel mills, I mean, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, New York, all,
Buffalo, yeah, even all the way over in
yeah.
Buffalo.
And Minnesota, because they had some ranges there that they were shipping from as well. All of those states benefited from having the Sulaks. And we put on here on the one sheet where, you know, right now you can't really see very much, but the live cam of the Sulaks. So the kids can watch Lower Lakers go through this spring. And so, and they might be still, you know, teachers might still be teaching this in the spring. So it might turn out to be, by the time they get here, it'd be perfect timing for them to look at the different the cameras that are there. So the dash pink shows the route between Lake Superior and Lake Huron and how the locks are set up to handle the large ships that come in. And is it 21? I think it's 21 feet.
It's about 20 feet.
20,
There's a
yeah.
20-foot drop
Yeah.
of the, so the lock has to act like an elevator.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Going up and down because ships coming from Lake Superior into Lake Huron with a full load turn around and go back and have to be raised up to Lake Superior's level to go back and get another load. So this is the area. The dangerous waterfalls are there. Like Carol said, you can't take one of the big lower Lakers across that. They wouldn't be able to handle it. So the Army Corps of Engineers created a way called, you know, locks that allowed the ships to go through there. And that's a connection, which is something that we talked about, you know, in Unit 1, about how connections between one thing and another help. So the locks, you know, the water elevators connected Lake Superior to Lake Huron, and it was really, really important. And it connected Minnesota to New York and, you know, places in the UP to Chicago. So the connection is there, and it was really important. So this shows the different locks. There's how many are there now, Carol? There are three?
There are at least three. And the
At
one
least
called the
three.
Polac, POE, uh, is the one that is being repaired. And they're going to complete it. They really are. You know, we first wrote this lesson 7 years ago, and it has, when they were all worried about getting funding for the Polac, and it's taken 7 years to get this thing done.
Mhm. So they're working on it now, Carol?
It's going to get completed in the next 1 or 2 years.
Oh, good. Good. And that's, you know, part of government as well. You know, we talk about how we can include the government and civics, um, so the fourth graders will understand. And if you pull in, you know, some of the more recent things that have happened, you know, your infrastructure that the government that we pay taxes for the government to take care of, you know, they're so important. If that lock stopped working, it would put a lot of strain on employees, you know, miners, or, you know, people that the Teamsters, the all, you know, all the people that are working in this industry, you know, they could lose their jobs because that's not working and we can't get the materials where it needs to go. So, you know, just reminding kids that, you know, the roads that we have outside our house are maintained by the government. You know, they're created by the government, they're maintained by the government, whether it's local, state, or federal. And they're supposed to take care of those things for us. And when we have potholes, we certainly make sure we tell the government all about it. Sorry, that's an aside. So the lock provided a safe way for boats to move around the St. Mary's River up and down it without having to deal with the rapids. And so the US government helped Michigan build our first state lock in 1855. And having the government come in and do that is for the public good. So it's not privately owned. So the government takes care of it and the government makes sure it's run properly. So the men that are up there running the Sulak, excuse me, that's a government job as opposed to the miners. Those are not government jobs. So the U.S. government helped Michigan build the bigger lock, the Poe lock in 1896. So larger ships could move through there. So, when we think about technology, the ships that first moved things through there were not these huge lower lakers. These were built later to hold more and more iron ore or copper ore or anything from, that could be moved. Anything, all the big heavy raw materials that were needed. So moving things, get them from the mines to the mills, was super, super important. So, um, and we have a video too, and an animated demonstration of what a lock is, because most kids don't have a clue what it is. So there's an animated description right here that you can click on, and it shows someone, actually did some artwork to create it. And there's also videos at the end. So many of the boats that traveled through the Sioux Locks were carrying the taconite. So these pellets, they look little, but when you load a ton of them, tons and tons of them into the big lower Lakers, they're very, very heavy. And if we talk about the Edmonds Fitzgerald a little bit, a lot of people thought that she had the weight of the iron ore in her belly is one of the contributing causes, besides the humongous storm of her sinking. So iron ore has to come from the mines. It needs to go to the steel mills. They have to go through by rail to water for the iron ore for Michigan and Minnesota, and they have to use the ports, and they have to use the lock, and the way it all connects and works together is really cool. Do you have anything else about that, Carol?
Uh, no,
think?
that's good. I just think the Sulaks are really neat.
They
That
are.
would be a neat tour. Although you can see a lot on video.
Yeah, and here, let's see. Okay, so here is the live cam of the Sioux Locks. I think you'll probably not see much more than snow right now. And then this video, it's just over 2 minutes. I'm sorry I forgot to put the timing there because I know that's really important um, of how long the video is. And then we have we're not totally done yet with lesson 2. We're going to include using iron and the manufacturing in Michigan.
Oh, I found Detroit is amazing.
Mhm.
Detroit was the stove capital of the world. It More stoves were made in Detroit. And could you go to lesson 1? Could you go back to lesson 1? Do you have that available?
You mean this lesson 1?
Yeah.
Okay. Where do you want me to
And
go?
go to, I think, how daily life changes. I think that's where we have a picture of stoves. It's just okay.
Yeah,
Remember,
there you go.
yeah, just remember how the Nolan mother, she had to cook. We don't hear much about her. We hear about the father cutting down trees, and we hear about the son shooting deer, and that was important, but they had to eat every day, and mom had to cook. And where did mom cook? She cooked in a place like a picture on the lower left. She she had to have the kids help bring in wood, and then she had to kind of make her own charcoal. She had to get that wood so it was glowing hot, and she had to get up at 6:30 in the morning in order to be able to get the wood heated up for breakfast. Um, she lived with a fireplace. Could you move to the next one? I suppose some fire, but what can you make if you have lots of iron ore? This is an this is a this is from Greenfield Village, and they have those old farmhouses, and other houses from the 1800s, that is an iron stove. And in the pail next to it, I think there's coal. Here's another iron stove. It's really different from our kitchens today. And then go to the next one. Phil and I were wandering through Illinois to get to Minnesota this past December, and we need to take breaks because we're old. And we stopped in a little museum in eastern Illinois. And what do I see there? An iron stove. And can you read what it says at the top? It says Detroit Stove Works. That iron ore came to Detroit in the 1880s and they made millions of stoves. They made other neat stuff too, which is kind of was practice for making automobiles, but that's the next story that we'll get to. I don't know if there's anything more in here. Yeah,
No,
that's it.
no. My mother-in-law had a stove that looked almost exactly like this one on the left. They had it in their home. They built their home. They bought the property in 1960. It didn't have indoor plumbing. It didn't have indoor heating. This is how they cooked. They cooked on it. And she had it for years. And then instead of they upgraded to a new one that looked like that, only was a little bit bigger. And Thanksgiving at her house, we would use the stove for warming things, and I mean, it had a big warming thing up here, and we would cook in it, and it was incredible. So,
Yeah, when I was 5 years old, my aunts on the farm in Nebraska, they cooked on the stove and they didn't have coal and they didn't have wood because there weren't enough trees. They burned corn cobs.
oh
I
wow.
can't imagine cooking dinner using corn cobs. Oh well.
And you can still buy stoves like this, whether it's still from the Detroit Stove Works or not. I know when they upgraded, I want to say it was like 2006 or 7. There's you can still get wood burning stoves like that. And when you live in the northern Michigan and you have weather like we've been having and you lose power, we would all go to Jack and Sanda's because they had heat. They had a big pot-bellied stove in the basement. They had this one in the kitchen area, and this is how we cooked. We would make hot dogs. I mean, you can make just about anything on it. Cook burgers or whatever. The problem with it is, it's not an even heat like the stoves we have now, but we cooked in the stove, on the stove, in the oven. This is a water reservoir that is on the side. They used these buckets for ashes because they used wood in the
Oh,
stove, and this is their ash bucket.
oh,
So
maybe that's what's next to the other one is an ash bucket. Yeah.
it could be either. I mean, if you're using coal, that makes sense to me that you would use that bucket for coal.
And
So
there are other it the steel was really important in daily life.
it sure was. And then we use actually one of the videos that we have. Oh, I hate it when it does that. One of the videos talks about um, oh, I have the record of the Edmund Fitzgerald in here. One of the videos that I need to add talks about Henry Ford, how important it was. He had bought um, some mines or a steel mill. I'd have to look it up.
He,
And
yeah,
go ahead, Carol.
yeah, he needed the iron ore from northern Michigan, from the Upper Peninsula. He also needed wood, so he needed wood to make charcoal.
And he needed wood for one of the trucks that he made, one of the very first trucks
Yeah, the
made out
panels,
of,
like the
yeah, the
side
panel.
panels on the cars. Yeah.
Yeah, yep. So we'll add that. I'll add that in there. And then it's going to be a really nice, when we talk about Henry Ford and manufacturing in the next unit, I mean, it's a nice link there. So I think
So
that's all I have.
we're pretty close to
We're close, not
6:30.
totally done. Yeah. And we're pretty close. We're not totally done, unfortunately.
We've got a
But
bunch of stuff in drafts.
yeah.
I I kind of thought I bit off more than I could chew with mining, but it's coming together.
Well, and like I said, I wasn't expecting the whole new Unit 1 because I thought, because, oh, we're not going to need much because, this unit is, on mining is really good. And, I really didn't have anything that I didn't like about it when I was teaching it. And the next thing, Carol, the overachiever, has created that whole first unit on copper mining, which is really good. It is fantastic, Carol. You did a fantastic job.
I I have and I hope that kids appreciate doing just even off the top of their head doing a comparison between, well, would I have liked to be a farmer in the 1800s, or would I have liked to be a lumberman in the 1800s, or would I have been a miner in the 1800s? Um, it's like people really worked hard.
Mhm. And their jobs were dangerous. The video talked about how um, the one big long video that has those couple little spots that are um, about at one point they were losing at least one worker a week in the mines. And so, in Frankfurt, my classes, were 20, 22, 25. You think about losing one of us once a week. I mean, that's just, or in the school, losing a kid once a week. It just, it's mind-boggling how dangerous that job was. So,
So we felt, I at least I felt sorry for the Nolans when they had to take out a mortgage and they had to find other ways to make money. Um, and, and and you just appreciate how people get through life as best they can working.
mhm.
One of the things I love about these revisions, ladies, before we kind of wrap up for the evening, is that you introduce that family in the very first unit and you keep coming back to them, which I think is a story that fourth graders will really appreciate as these get rolled out this year and next year by the teachers who are attending and watching these videos. So I think it's a real great value add that helps make sense of the senseless content expectations that we have for fourth grade. And I think you guys did a great job with all of that. So
Well, and one of the things that I know kids have a hard time grasping things because sometimes they're just so out there. But when you give it the human element, like the Nowlands, like these miners, could you imagine, losing your dad in the mines? It's just, yeah, his job was so, their jobs were so dangerous. You didn't know whether he was going to come home that night.
It's kind of like Dad is grumpy tonight. Well, yeah.
So. Well, in the video too talks a little bit about strikes, some of the early strikes, and some of the miners went on strike because it was so dangerous and they weren't paid very well. And Henry Ford was paying $5 a day. And so a lot of them left because, you know, why would I be in this dangerous job when I can make, three times as much down there? So,
And what I realized reading different accounts of this is all of this time we talk about farming, then we talk about lumbering, then we talk about mining, like they're happening at different times, but they're happening simultaneously. And everybody I read says, for the longest time, at least half the population was doing farming. And a bunch of these miners, what they really wanted to do was make enough money so they could buy a farm in a place where they could raise good crops, which might not always be the UP, but still. Um, or, all of this time, you see how important lumber trees were in in the mine. It held it up. Or trees were in 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 making steel at first when you used charcoal. So all of these things are happening simultaneously, producing the kind of world we have today, which is so different.
Well, and one of the things, with your picture about the cell phones, the kids will understand that. They really will. They'll get, wow, look at the different kinds of cell phones. One of the activities that I'm working on is having kids talk to the elders in their family about how they used to communicate. How did you talk to, Aunt Helen, 2 towns away or, 3 hours away? How did you talk to her? Well, you didn't call her during the day because the rates, on the telephone rates, is 25, 30 cents a minute. You waited until after 7 o'clock and then you called at 7 o'clock where it was only 10 cents as opposed to 30 cents. And when I would travel, I would go see my aunt and she'd like, call me when you get home. Okay. So I wouldn't call her. I would call her, I'd let it ring twice, and I would hang up so she wouldn't be charged 10 cents to know that I got home okay. You know, I don't want to call myself an elder, but how did people communicate? You wrote a letter and you had to wait for an answer.
Yep.
What do kids do now? They text their friends and they have an answer in 3 seconds. So, that kind of activity, having kids think about it, talking to the elderly.
I just thought of investigating smartphones yesterday, of all things. So it's like I'm out on the web looking for information about copper and smartphones, and it's all because I had gone grocery shopping, and I texted my sister in Texas, and 30 seconds later I got a reply. And it's like, this would never happen with the Nolans. It took them a whole week,
Yeah.
at least, to get a letter to somebody. So, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, gang, before we close out tonight, just wondering if John or Rebecca or anybody else who's with us tonight has any quick questions for Luann or Carol?